who have us all scratching our heads and saying, like my next guest, take a look at Verda's story.
She found out but never questioned her race.
Am I black or am I white? It doesn't matter to me because I'm not changing.
Again, Bird just released a book documenting her findings. And this morning she's talking with Marvin Hurst about her 70 years of blackness.
Am I black or am I white? It doesn't matter to me because I'm not changing.
For 70 years, Verda thought she was African American, but she wasn't. She actually was white. Thank you for being here today. You have a very unique story. How did you find out that you were actually white?
When my adopted mother died, I was going through her house and found an adoption document that had my birth name on it. But I didn't know it was me.
Verda, this is just an extraordinary story. The sort of story that you'd read or watch in a film in Hollywood, or you might read a book. It seems so extraordinary that you could have been brought up absolutely believing that you were black and then find out all those years later that your parents were biologically white.
If you look through the pictures of Verda Wagner Bird's life in Newton, Kansas, it's a good one. She was the daughter of railroad porter Ray Wagner and his wife Edwina. Life was good.
I'm comfortable with being a black woman.
The couple adopted her back in the 1940s. She found out but never questioned her race.
I thought that I was black all my life, not knowing any difference. But at the age of 72, I got my adoption documents, and every document said that I was white. My parents were white, my siblings were white, I was white, and thus I have had a beautiful black life. I was raised in Newton, Kansas, went to Newton High School, graduated in 1960, had a very good life. I was overwhelmed by the history that of my life. My birth mother had passed. My adopted mother never told me that I was adopted, and much less never told me that I was born white. She never revealed that to me.
When Verda Bird's case was brought to my attention, one of the things that struck me about it was its similarity to a case that arose in the 1950s in New Orleans, Louisiana. There was a case in which a white woman gave birth to a child, and right after giving birth to the child, the white woman was overcome by a stroke, and she didn't recover from it. She died within a year. And her sister took the child home with her and said that she was going to raise the child as one of her own. The sister of this woman already had several children. And the problem was that as the child grew, after a couple of weeks went by, a couple of months went by, and this child's skin started turning darker. And this white woman's neighbors came to her and said, "Hey, listen, it's obvious that this is a colored child. We can't have this child in this neighborhood." And things got so bad that the sister of the now deceased woman turned the child over to city authorities in New Orleans, saying, I can't hold on to this child anymore. My neighbors are against me. They're threatening me. I just can't proceed anymore. And the city authorities took the child who had been abandoned, and a black couple sought to adopt the child, but was unable to do so. And the reason why the black couple was unable to adopt this child was because when the child was born, on the birth certificate, the Louisiana authorities stamped the child white. And there was a law in Louisiana that expressly prohibited adoption across the race line. So the black couple tried to get the racial designation of the child changed. They said, the white people who pressured the sister of the birth mother to abandon the child, they knew the child was colored. Let's just say that the child's colored, and then we can adopt. Well, officials in Louisiana wouldn't allow that either, because Louisiana law said that in order to change the racial designation of a person, you had to have proof beyond all doubt. There was a trial over the racial identity of the child, and the courts in Louisiana said, no, there's some doubt, so we're not going to allow the child's racial designation to be changed. Since the child's racial designation, we're not going to allow the racial designation to be changed, we're not going to allow these black people to adopt this child.
Adoption first started, it wasn't called adoption. It was called unwed mothers. And unwed mothers were the young girls who had babies out of wedlock. They weren't married, and the parents didn't want them to stay at home because the parents would get embarrassed that their daughter was having a baby and wasn't married to anyone, and they didn't want that stigma attached to their family. So they would send the girls off to unwed mother homes. The unwed mother homes were places where they would go have their baby, then go back home like nothing never happened, because they didn't want anybody to know that their daughter had had a baby. The homes were not well kept. They were really broken down and not financially supported or anything. You just go there and take care of your babies and then leave them, and you go home, and they were like throwaway babies.
Back in the early 40s and 50s and 60s, throwaway babies were babies who were biracial babies. These were babies where white men had babies by black women, and they would not take them, and they were either thrown away. Some of those babies were killed when they were born. They were drowned, and they were thrown away. And a lot of those babies were just given to the mom. And but the white man or the white families had nothing to do with those babies, and they called them throwaway babies.
The picture every parent and teenager should see. The story of girls who go too far, too fast. It's the authentic emotional drama of girls in trouble. The go-for-broke generation that tries anything for size.
I understand that you're worried that my baby might inherit some of my traits.
Now we've met you, I'm certain we have nothing to worry about.
That check they gave you, it's as if they were buying my child.
Well, if you keep your baby, what have you really got to offer him? Betty, I asked you to wait upstairs.
They're taking my
Betty,
baby.
we're just trying to make it easier for you.
They're taking my baby. Let me go. Let me go.
Unwed mothers' home, actually the professional term for our maternity homes. And they were homes that were specifically for young women who wanted to maintain their confidentiality. They had gotten pregnant out of wedlock, and so agencies, particularly the one that I worked for was the Crestview Christian Maternity Home. It was the only licensed facility in the Southeast that would take unwed mothers, and those mothers wanted to maintain total confidentiality. They didn't want anybody to know that they were ever pregnant. So they would come to those facilities, stay there for the duration of their 9 months, have the baby, go to school, place the baby for adoption, stay in that facility for 6 weeks after the birth of their child. Then they would return to their hometown as if they had transferred to a school and resume their everyday life. And nobody knew that they had been pregnant, had a child, gave it up for adoption, none of that.
The baby scoop era developed after that, where the girls would go to have abortions, or they could have their baby adopted out.
Most of the white parents did not give their babies up for adoption because they had abortions. And they never got to the point where they were giving their children up for adoption. Those who chose not to have an abortion, almost 100% gave their children up for adoption.
And if that baby was not satisfactory to you, and the next day or two you could take the baby back and then get another one. So, because they didn't match the kids, they didn't match the babies, they didn't do much of any race thing or culture thing. They didn't do that too much, but they would just let you exchange a baby for another one that you might like better.
Have I ever experienced a child being brought back because of the race? Yes. I had one child that was actually a war-born baby. It was a child that was born during Desert Storm, and the baby looked white when it was born. We thought it was white, but when the couple adopted the child, after a few months, the baby began to turn dark. They carried the baby to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician determined that the baby was black, and they brought the child back.
What happened to my biological parents? The story is told to me that they were very, very poor. Daddy Earl, their names were Earl and Daisy Beagle. Daddy Earl was poorly educated, not able to keep a job too much. He was poor, he didn't really have any particular skills, and it was very difficult for him to find work. Daisy Beagle, Mama Daisy, she went downtown Kansas City to help get income, but she fell 30 feet down from a trestle and was hit by another train going in a different direction, and she was put in the hospital because she was very seriously injured and broke nearly every bone in her body. Thus, the children that she had at home were placed in a foster children's home and foster care because she couldn't take care of us. And her husband had gone in the army, so the children us kids had to stay in the children's home.
not only do I criticize race matching, I criticize all these different forms of matching, because as soon as you start that matching stuff, what happens is you slow down the process by which children in need of homes can get homes. I mean, you know, for every bureaucratic hurdle you place in the way of a child needing a home delays that child getting a home. And the longer a child is sort of out in the child welfare bureaucracy, with every passing day, it becomes less likely that that child will find an adoptive home. Well, that happens time and time and time again. And so it's no accident that black people are disproportionately affected by, and you can just name it, disease, unemployment, homelessness, crime. All of these things affect the statistics with respect to foster care and adoptive care, so that in every state that I've ever studied, a disproportionate number of the people who are in the child welfare bureaucracy, people of color, these kids need a home. And if you make it, the more difficult you make it for them to get a home, a new home, the less likely they are to, be adopted. And that is, from my perspective, a bad thing, because there's no substitute for a person committing themselves to seeking to raise a person who is in need of help. I'm a tremendous, I admire people who adopt. People who adopt, again, in Verda's family, perfect? No, not perfect by any means. Everybody has their problems. Everybody has their drawbacks and everything. But here we have people who are at least committed to trying to make life a bit better for someone who has, for tragic reasons, lost their birth parents. And I salute such people.
Almost always, children who were biracial were given up for adoption, and they were placed with black families. Never had a case that I know about where there was a biracial child placed with a white family. Only now that you see some of that happening. But back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, none of that would take place. Biracial children were hard to adopt by white parents because white parents didn't reach out to adopt biracial children because the law prevented them from adopting biracial children. There were actually legal grounds where they could not adopt black children or vice versa. Only when the law changed did they not use race as a criteria for adoption. But even in society, it was not heard of where a white family would adopt a black child or vice versa. That just did not happen.
I don't care where we're talking about. I don't care if we're talking about Maine. I don't care if we're talking about Massachusetts. I don't care if we're talking about New York, Connecticut, Illinois. I don't care. Even in the most so-called enlightened states in the United States, California, if we're talking about anything mixed, black communities. Now, of course, you know, was there prejudice within black communities? Yes, there was prejudice within black communities. Yes, a lot of black people didn't like mixture either, but were willing to tolerate.
In my era, I was white. All the kids, and see, children are mean, they don't understand. I lived with my foster mother in the projects. I was just about the lightest thing in the projects, or I believe I was the only mixed child. I can't say that with 100%, clarity, but I believe that I was the only one, and there were only 2 people that were close to what I looked like, and they lived upstairs over us. It was a white couple that lived in the projects. That was unheard of back then, but they did, and they were really cool. But it was awful. The bullying was awful. It was in my own family, my cousins, I did stuff too, but the white, you white, they didn't understand, and that caused a lot of damage. My father was put in jail for a speeding ticket. And so the police and, nobody approved of this back then. This is before I was born, so I was born in 72. So this was happening like 1970. These things were happening back then where they put him in jail for a long time for a ticket. And I'm not sure if it was a speeding ticket or a parking ticket or what kind of ticket it was. They did not like the relationship between a black man and a white woman. This is in Missouri. And so my mother, from my understanding, she would go downtown, harass the whoever was in charge of the jail, the judge or whoever it was. And finally it got to the point where the judge said, okay, I will let him go, but he has one option. And that option is to leave here by 5 o'clock. So he was actually run out of town. To my understanding, what I was told, they had to run home, put clothes in a bag and leave, because it was really close to that time. If not, my dad feared for his life that he might have been killed or put in jail for a very long time over a parking ticket. But it wasn't about the ticket, it was about the relationship they had. Because a black man was never supposed to be with a white woman. My biological mother passed when I was a year old. I was almost 2. And her parents were racist. They didn't like black people. So they didn't approve of her relationship with my father. So they came to Champaign, Illinois, where we live, and basically buried her and took my sister back with them to Missouri and left me there. So at that time, my father wasn't in the picture, so there was no one to take care of me. So I went straight into the custody of DCFS.
How did it make me feel once I found out that my parents were white? Like I said a few seconds ago, it made me feel overwhelmed. She felt like it was her choice, her decision. She and Daddy Ray, that was their decision, and they wanted a baby, and I was the most available one, and I fit their skin color, so I would fit right in. So regardless of whether I was black or white, the skin color had a lot to do with it, because she was like that.
With the passage of the Adoption and Safe Families Act, which said that we could no longer use race as a consideration. That opened up the adoptions where we were now able to place white children with black families. Even though the law says that we can, most agencies are very careful to make sure that if we are considering placing a white child with a black family, that family can make sure that that child knows what culture it comes from, and they are able to raise a child in the atmosphere and environment that they would grow up to be productive citizens. And same way with the African American child, if they're placed with a white family, we want to make sure that they will expose that child to its culture.
Let me say something about the policy of race matching. And let's again take Verda's case, and let's take ourselves back to the 1940s. In the 1940s, it was the belief that the most successful adoptions would be those adoptions in which society did not know there had been an adoption. In the 1940s, adoption was still frowned upon. It was viewed with a lot of skepticism. And one of the ways in which we know it, again, Verda's book brings this forth. In the 1940s, when you were adopted, what happened? Your original birth certificate was destroyed, and a new birth certificate was created. And your name on your, the initial name, get rid of that, get rid of everything. Let's pretend that you, the adopted child, are actually the natural child.
I think that the mood of society now, the laws have changed, and I think that we have a lot of interracial marriages, so I don't think it's the same mindset as it was back then.
If I would never have been adopted by my black family, that is very hard to answer, because the good Lord has control of everybody's life, and everybody has a plan, and that they don't know what their life will be, has been, can be, but with the good Lord's guidance and the parent teachings, hopefully everybody can make the right choices in their adult life. But sometime that can be difficult. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think my life would have been much different. Only if it could have been, if I could have been a richer woman, then maybe that might have happened. But financially and mentally and physically, I am happy as I am.